Hello, everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers for such an amazing workshop. I think my talk, I'm coming back to the Mediterranean, but echoes pretty much, let's say, echoes somehow Kelly's idea of an alternative archive. And you will see, I built my presentation thinking at this simple question Bidisha raised early this morning, what happened to the bodies drowned? And I will start with a quote. I will first try to share my screen. Okay. Is it okay? Okay, great. So I'm starting with a quote. It gives me no pleasure to know that the last two bodies to arrive in Catania on June 13, 2018 are now resting in the town cemeteries called morgue, forgotten by everyone and desecrated by a slow technocratic bureaucracy. Nobody kisses them now, they are dead. Such a gesture fills that otherwise often empty vessel that is humanity. A dichotomy between words and truth. The help of colleagues is providential. Sylvia's words are like a lifeboat to me, and I saved the email Ricardo sent me a few days after the landing on January 8, 2018, as though it were a relic. On that day, 8 bodies were disembarked, now dispersed across different cemeteries on the island. Today, still, I keep the tombs of these bodies within me. I visit them every day. I have so much to ask them. They have so much to tell me. This is an excerpt from notes written by Davide. Davide, together with Ricardo, Silvia, and some other folks, developed a project aimed at contributing to endeavors to identify the bodies of dead border crossers arriving to Catania. Today, I would like to focus on how the bodies found at sea and taken to Catania, the ones which were taken, are managed, exploring both their itinerary and how this small group of people from the city has become involved in this project to give them a name and a biography. I will draw here on a fieldwork study that I have been conducting together with my colleague Filippo Furri since January 2018 with the Catania Red Cross Restoring 5 Million Links program, around which the project question emerged. This Red Cross program, as you might know, was founded several decades ago to help families searching for loved ones who had disappeared as a result of armed conflicts or natural disasters. And today it is largely used to help reestablish family contacts that have been severed due to the conditions in which people cross borders. So in Catania, this group of people first drew a map of migrant graves in the municipal cemetery, and then began collecting all the information that had been produced about these bodies by the various institutions involved in dealing with them. Working on the hypothesis that connecting all the data about one body might provide clues to identifying them, the aim or the ultimate aim to this project is to devise a technical tool, a database, maybe an archive, that will allow unknown bodies to be identified and their families to be located. The intention is to make the traces left behind by the deceased to speak. With that goal in mind, Silvia, Ricardo, Davide, and a few others succeeded in convincing all the institutions more or less closely involved in managing the bodies of the value of working together. And this enabled them to obtain all the necessary authorizations to consult the files held about the deceased by all the police agencies, all the municipal administrative institutions, and so on. So through the ethnography of the creation of this database, we were able to observe how the various actors who participated in the project, including Ricardo Davide and so on, what we call the squadra, worked and negotiated between different relationships to death, operating at, let's say, to put it in a quite simple, maybe simplistic way, two imbricated levels. On the one hand, concrete management of the deceased and the files accompanying them, making their mobility possible from the point of landing to the cemetery where they are buried. And on the other hand, active involvement in the identification process, in the identification project, translating the participants' desire to find out more about the dead and to take them in. Between 2015 and 2018, Catania became one of the main ports of arrival in Italy for search and rescue operations in the Central Mediterranean. And in March 2016, the port of Catania became a mobile hotspot. Several thousands people whose lives were in danger at sea were brought to dry land, and alongside the living, many others did not survive the crossing. As you know, countless bodies remain somewhere at the bottom of the sea. But during this period, over 260 bodies were taken on to Catania. The dead are dealt with differently depending that there are depending on their number. But the process always relies on the powers and means of the municipality where they disembark, whatever its economic situation. The authorities are warned that there are deceased passengers before the boat docks, and the municipal undertakers prepare themselves. I'm just putting the picture for you to have an idea of how it works. And at the same time, the deputy public prosecutor appoints one or more pathologists who will arrive on site at the port in order to examine the bodies. This examination generally consists in an external inspection, allowing them to determine the cause of death. The bodies are then taken to a morgue at one of the city's hospitals, and this is where DNA samples are taken and where the forensic examination is carried out, obtaining information such as the deceased's physical features, any distinctive signs such as tattoos, piercing, etc. Clothes and objects found on the body are sent to the public prosecutor's office, where they are stocked in plastic bags. While the bodies are being transported, a judicial investigation is launched. Its aim is to determine whether a crime has been committed, and if it has, to find the perpetrators. In other terms, it tracks the smugglers. I don't have the time to talk about it, but just to put it very clearly, if a crime is suspected, the public prosecutor can request an autopsy and proceed with an investigation, allowing the victim to be identified. But the autopsy serves to determine the cause of death. But for the death at sea, an external examination, the one that is conducted on site at the port, is usually enough. As for investigations to identify the bodies, if they do take place, we have never heard of them. It has never been mentioned in Catania or elsewhere. The reason is quite simple. There is no institution tasked with identifying these bodies. Even when the survivors of a shipwreck provide a name for one of their traveling companions who have died, for instance, this does not lead to steps being officially undertaken for the body formally to be identified by the tribunal, which is the only power which alone has the power to rule that an identification has satisfied the burden of proof. In other terms, the dead negatively mirroring living migrants who are subjected, as you know, to a range of procedures aimed at identifying them and ensuring their traceability, are not the subject of any official inquiry that might allow the name to be given to them. So the bodies remained in the morgue for a variable amount of time until the official documents delivered by the public prosecutor's office and the civil registry indicate that it is possible to move them to the cemetery. The municipal cemetery in Catania is an incredible place. I don't have much time to talk about it, but it's fascinating from an ethnographic point of view. And in our investigation, it allowed us to learn and understand many things related to the management of the bodies and to diverse forms of attachment to the dead. On my first visit to this huge cemetery, I saw this memorial monument, which has inaugurated on March 10, 2015, for the 17 victims who had been drowned the previous year and who were later joined by 5 more bodies from a shipwreck in May 2015. Plaques surround a sculpture, as you may see here, and each gravestone bears the inscription of a verse from the poem Migrations by the Nigerian author Wole Soyinka. That day, the day of my first visit, and almost every time I went, I saw flowers on the graves. Not far from the monument, there is a large, almost empty space. On the one side, a square with graves on the verge of falling into abandonment, crosses or simple metal plaques. Almost all bore a name, a date of birth, a date of death. And Davide, Silvia, and Ricardo, who were with me, explained to me that this was the Cuadrado povertà, the poverty square, where people with no family or whose loved ones could not afford to pay for a burial were inhumated at the city's expenses. On the other side, here, there was a slightly sloped area with 4 rows of 17 mounds, each with a black metal plate planted in the earth. On each of these, alphanumeric codes would be read with dates and names of ships. So observing the cemetery and engaging into discussion with the people working there, as well as with the undertakers and the civil registry, allowed us to piece together the various developments in how bodies have been managed. In May 2014, for the first time, the Italian Maritime Coordination Center designated Catania as a disembarkation port after a search and rescue operation conducted as part of Mare Nostrum. The Italian Navy ship, Regale, arrived in Catania port with 266 survivors and 15 dead aboard. Given that Italian law consigns the management of death on its territory to, as I was saying, to a municipal administration, the municipality had to organize itself as a matter of urgency. The bodies were transported to the morgue, and the authorities came up with the idea of erecting this monument to commemorate the dead. On April 18, 2015, as you know, one of the largest Mediterranean shipwrecks claimed the lives of approximately 1,000 people. Catania's public prosecutor was tasked with handling the case. The first bodies were retrieved in the days and months that followed, and their remains were examined in the NATO base in Melilli, near the town of Augusta. But the public prosecutor in Catania had to find the destination for the first bodies. In order to avoid dispersing the corpses throughout Sicily, would have been the case with the shipwrecks near Lampedusa in 2013, they came out with this idea of of a Quadrado Migranti, a migrant square, that came to be laid out opposite the poverty square. It first took 13, it took in 13 bodies labeled with a new classification, but these bodies from this huge shipwreck were subjected to an exceptional protocol that was set up, decided by the national authorities that had released substantial funds to recover the bodies from the sea, even salvage the wreck itself, and examine the human remains with a view of identifying them. And the task was entrusted to the forensic pathologist and anthropologist Cristina Catania, director of the Labanov Institute in Milan. And the project also involved the Italian Red Cross, the Red Cross International Committee, the Italian National Commission of Missing Persons, and so on. A couple of months afterwards, in August 2015, a Norwegian ship docked at Catania. There were 49 bodies, aboard, people who had asphyxiated in the hold of a boat. This time, no exceptional national protocol was set up, and it was up to the town to process them, to treat them. An investigation was opened by the public prosecutor, while the Border Sanitary Inspection Office set up a barrier of containers to demarcate and isolate an area that the bodies could be dealt with and processed. The public prosecutor made arrangements for the burials to be carried out quickly because it was in the middle of a heat wave in August. The codes given to the bodies by the forensic police were then used by the municipality and inscribed upon the metal plaques that I discovered that day in my first visit to the cemetery. And as the disembarkations were taking place on almost daily basis from then on, the city needed to deal with the presence in its jurisdiction of many more dead bodies that its administrative infrastructure was capable of handling. More bodies required faster inspections and more efficient transfers for both public health and administrative reasons. And after this experience in August 2015, a dispositif in the Foucauldian sense of the term for processing dead bodies at the border emerged, which has since been activated on several occasions. But among all the bodies of those who have died in the Mediterranean and arrived in Catania since 2015, the only bodies to be identified formally and repatriated, thanks to the mobilization of family in their home country and members of the extended family in Europe, were 3 men from Pakistan. They had died from lack of oxygen in the hold of a boat, along with 46 other people. Their bodies, I said, arrived 2 days later in Catania. They were taken to the morgue, then to a cemetery for burial, and then they were exhumed and began the journey back to their country of origin 4 months after that death. They were taken to Naples in the vehicle of an agency specializing in funerary transportation before being flown to Rome and from there to Islamabad. While the rest of the journey and the accompanying rituals remain unknown to me, to us, what we do know is that all those who participated in identifying and transporting them still keep their passage through Catania fresh in their memory. There is no doubt because these cases, these 3 young men, were as rare and as they were clear. They had a complete death, explained Mrs. Giordano, who for many years now has been in charge of the Civil Registry Office for migrants who have died at sea. Their case files have been, a beginning and then she explained. Their constituent documentation is complete, and they can therefore be archived. At an institutional level, these 3 deaths are complete, whereas all the others, all those upon which the Red Cross team is working using the database, remain so far incomplete. However, the completeness of these deaths is not simply a question of administrative or of the state. It is also the shared aim of those working in the institutions involved in the management of these deceased bodies in Catania. Whether they are forensic police officers, undertakers, pathologists, civil registry workers, whether they are young or approaching retirement, whether the social profile and biographical trajectories, all the people we met cooperate actively with the Red Cross in the database project, and their participation goes together with a discourse that is empathetic in register. Just an example, those poor people, I'm quoting Mrs. Giordano, when I think about them, I think that they left to find a better life for themselves, for their families, just as we would do. They are young, they are like our people, our young people. Similarly, Mr. Mancini, the head of the undertaker office at the cemetery, told us, we treat them like any other body, but to tell the truth, we are distressed by them the same way we are distressed by the death of a young person here who dies in an accident. During discussions with different people we met within the institutions, we had numerous statements connecting these others about whom they knew little with an us, Catanians, Sicilians, Italians, Europeans, depending on the interlocutor and the context. And the words frequently stressed a shared humanity, to take up Davide's words I was quoting at the beginning of my talk. And the discussions, in the discussions, and there is a frequent connection that is made between the unfortunate, skinny Sicilian, these unfortunate young migrants, and the youth from here that speak to a possible familiarity for my interlocutors. This familiarity, I'm finishing.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
No problem. This familiarity, and more than that, I would say this form of relatedness is often expressed. Li portiamo a casa. We bring them home. Many interlocutors speak of some of the dead using the first names or surnames that were mentioned in a testimony or in a document, which in fact are not a result of the identification process, but it's a tentative to humanize them. They sometimes give names. And it seems to me that a new way for these deaths to be socially enrolled arises. Our interlocutors' practices and discourse serve as acts of extension, to quote Vincent Després, that allows the dead to exist in their lives, both in a set of actions directed towards them, to commemorate them, help identify them, and in conversations with their friends or in their dreams. Mrs. Pessina from the Polizia Scientifica told her daughter in detail, or at least with the detail she had, the life and trajectory of the 3 young Pakistanis who were repatriated. Mr. Mancini also used to talk about some dead migrants, I'm quoting, to his wife and children. Mrs. Giordano often dreams of dead youngsters whose lives she imagines. I'm finishing with another quote. The dead should be mourned, but who mourns for these dead people? Are they mourned? Asked Ricardo after a day of disembarking bodies. I think in the context of a reflection upon the value of life in contemporary Western world, Ricardo's question can be seen echoing this unreliability Butler talks about of the almost inherently precarious and vulnerable lives led by migrants. However, I think that our ethnography in Catania leads us to believe that these deaths in the Mediterranean do, in fact, produce a grieving process. A grief by proxy, I would say. A grief by proxy, as I were the father, the mother, the sister, as she or he cannot mourn, well, I do. And we have here a sort of inverted mirror at a tiny level of the refoulement by proxy Charles was talking about earlier. All the people, that's my last paragraph, all the people we spoke with were engaged in processing these bodies, and as such initially approached them from a technical material perspective. However, they all soon expressed forms of empathy first related to shared humanity. And then the modalities whereby connections were made to these bodies expressed the need to extend a kind of hospitality, albeit in death. And indeed, hospitality is a term that came up time and time again in the discussions and the interviews we have been conducting. Families may not always be able to cry for their dead, but each person involved in these dead people, involved with these dead people, by processing their case file, by gathering together their remains, made a place for them in his or her life. Many shed tears for them. And these deaths exist in the array of experiences and practices shared by those involved in the project. They are also present within the city with the monuments and plaques. I don't have the time to talk about them. But I think it is as though it were possible together to ward off oblivion and hold them close by giving them a home in this world. Thank you.
So first of all, can you hear and see me properly? Okay, great. So first of all, many thanks to Thanatic Ethics Project for organizing this stimulating workshop. So it's also a pleasure for me to share this panel with Carolina and Kelly. So I would like also to apologize for having postponed previously my presentation during the seminar series. So thanks to Bidisha and Thomas for their kind patience, as I was captured by my fieldwork in Senegal. So actually I just came back from there. So my research is part of the Migration, Transnationalism and Social Protection in Europe ERC-funded project that looks at policies and practices shaping migrants' access to social protection in home and host countries. So what I will present you today are some preliminary results of the PhD research that I started 2 years and a half ago. So I will see if I can share my screen. All right, here. Okay, does it work? Perfect. So, transnational engagements around Senegalese migrants' deaths. So I will first contextualize you a few elements regarding Senegalese migrant deaths routes to Europe. So Spanish media and authorities termed the so-called boat people crisis of 2006 Canary Islands hypervisible, as it was indeed the starting of external border control practices between Europe and Senegal, and the deployment also of the well-known hero operation, Frontex operation, when around 30,000 sub-Saharan migrants reached the islands. So the slogan, as you can see in this painting, Barça wala Barsakh, that means in Wolof going to Barcelona or dying, well, express and highlights the Senegalese popular representation of that period around migration and death during the journey. So afterwards, since 2016, and more recently during last fall in November 2020, there was a significant increment also of Senegalese migrants' irregular arrivals to the Canary Islands and the consequent reinforcement of mobilizations of the Spanish security forces. So actually, when I just came back and I took my flight at the airport of Dakar, I could see also that there is a presence of Spanish security forces controlling also documents of the travelers. So it tells a lot. At the same time, Senegalese authorities remained quite silent around the issue during last fall, while a civil society collective emerged in Senegal, so the collective 480, CEDEM, so 1480, it's enough, in reference to the first 480 deaths that were counted on the migration routes to the Canary Islands, which is of course an underestimated number. So this led, among others, to some anonymous burials in Dakar for bodies that were recovered along the Senegalese coast by fishing boats, but also along the migration journey along the coast of Mauritania, Morocco, or in the Canary Islands themselves. But I won't focus in my presentation on this issue. It was just to frame it shortly. Because, however, and once reaching Europe, the embodiment of illegality, especially in Spain and Southern Europe, exposed still Senegalese migrants to the risk of death, as we will see further. And on the other hand, of course, regular migration routes, while securing migrants' journey, do not prevent the often inevitable deaths in destination countries and the related multiple forms of transnational engagements. So let's move to my research question. So how do community and family networks, as well as market and states, engage transnationally around Senegalese migrant states? So I decided to articulate the following bodies of literature that most of you, I guess, well know. So anthropology and death, migration and death, and transnational social protection, which is more related to our research project. So anthropology gives us indeed the inputs to produce diversity of meanings and functions of death in context of migration, so in a Durkheimian understanding of it. So the bad deaths jeopardize the cohesion of the community, whether familiar, social, or political. And however, through mobilizations, death can also be a vehicle for rebuilding cohesion. So that is why it's also important to take into account the productive political dimension of death. So we can see indeed that coffins, in the example of the picture I took during a demonstration in Brussels, can become symbolically political tools. So let's move now to transnational social protection. I don't know. It's blocked. Here we are. Okay. So body repatriation and further engagements around violent death express the need to ensure a funerary social protection, not only for the deceased, but also for the community, the family, and the state. On one hand, we can frame expressions from below that are shaped by migrants, community, and family, between a kind of relationships of solidarity, reciprocity, but also obligations toward the deceased and the community. So this is the main cause for mobilization, as we will see further. On the other hand, we have also expressions from above that are shaped by diaspora institutions in origin countries, but also some engagements of destination countries in cases, for instance, of municipalities. So let's see then some methodological aspects. So I'm conducting a multi-site ethnography between Belgium, Spain, and Senegal with diverse actors, such as migrants associations, but also migrants' families, home and host states authorities, Senegalese cemeteries, and markets. So the focusing point, the key transnational practice that I try to follow since I started my research is the practices body repatriation. So this manner I could observe two different segments between sometimes in Europe, in Belgium, in Spain, or in Senegal. Well, the different steps of this challenging practice, but also trying to catch what other engagements take place beyond this practice. So let's continue then with some first results that I wanted to share. So in Belgium, despite a relatively small Senegalese population, we have 4 Senegalese migrant associations that are based explicitly around body repatriations. So they have different solidarity understandings and ethnic origins. And conversely, in Spain, religious and cultural organizations are those who support body repatriation. But some initiatives structured regimes of body repatriation are recently emerging. So we have different patterns and times of migration also between two countries. So in case of death of a non-member of those associations, it's spontaneous calls of support are not only possible, but also very quick and efficient, as they embrace through multiple scale of communications, local and transnational givers, so no matter the ethnicity, nationality, and even their knowledge of the deceased. So it happens that, for instance, someone in New York or in Milan would give for a deceased in Belgium. So following the words of a participant, death is the #1 cause for solidarity. Another research participant told me in the same way, we must contribute, because if I don't give, who will give for me? But this brings also about the counter gift that the giver will receive when dying. And so therefore to give is just also a manner to plan and ensure the future good death of the giver. So let's focus now on the particularity of violent death. All right, so among other violent deaths, I focused on 2 violent deaths of Senegalese street vendors that became very emblematic in Spain. So as you can see in the flyer done for the Black Lives Matter mobilization in last June in Madrid, we have in particular 2 figures, the one of Mambay, who died on the left, who died in Madrid in 2018, and the one of Morcilla on the right, who died in Barcelona in 2015. So both died after police persecution. So those deaths expressed before and an after in Senegalese migrants' bottom-up political mobilization in Spain, because they significantly triggered the emergence of several activist organizations, such as street vendor syndicates, all around the country. So it was like a boom, as stated an activist. Justice and memory for those deaths were the first claims, but they also get with much more fights. So anti-racism, anti-capitalism, and so on. So those deaths became very powerful flags for empowerment. However, with such a diverse implication of factors around those deaths, some conflict of representation take also place. So violent deaths unite, but also divide, especially when it comes to justice, where family members tend to be fighting alone. So this seems thus to be a contested political tool. So now let's see what about the engagement from authorities. So it appears that states react through discretionary measures to those violent deaths in particular that crystallize engagement. So Senegalese states engagement around the deaths of its citizens has been evolving over time. So there is a fund of emergency covering some repatriation that is available since a couple of decades with a discretionary power of decision. So, and it's based on typology of deaths, including cases of assassinates or those kind of disturbing deaths. No? However, there is also a new trend of redirecting the beneficiaries of this fund to private insurances. So more generally, whatever the cause of death, with special discounts that would be negotiated by the diaspora institutions and the markets. So in this way, the state aims to incentivize Senegalese abroad to register to consular lists for voting and accessing to a kind of package, as they call it, of benefices that could include body repatriation insurance. So I took this picture in Dakar, just close to the main public cemetery, where we can see one of those new offers of the market with a special target to the diaspora. So at destination countries, states may also engage around this. So for instance, and exceptionally in the case of Spain, some Spanish municipalities have been supporting with discretion some fees for body repatriation of cases of migrants who died in violent conditions, such cases of assassinates, fearing that time riots such as those that happened in Madrid and in Barcelona after the death of the street vendors that I did mention before. So on the other hand, in the context of the pandemic, some European states have imposed the requirements or even prohibited the repatriation of COVID-19 victims. So I had indeed a very recent information that Belgium seems to impose a quarantine of 2 weeks to the body before repatriation, while Spain refused the repatriation of at least some bodies, such as the one of a Senegalese migrant that died recently in Catalonia. So let's move now to what happened in particular with the engagement around COVID-19 deaths. They reveal very original forms of engagement. So what happened? Senegal, despite having repatriated part of its living citizens abroad at the starting of the pandemic, has decided to prohibit the body repatriation of COVID-19 victims. So this was between early April and early March, so 1 month. So however, and during that month, the state implemented consular emergency programs that included the funding of burial of its citizens who died of COVID-19 in Europe. But this raised very important mobilizations, such as the creation of a transnational associative campaign for the CRC, the Collective for Body Repatriation, with the lemon, the slogan in Wolof, Sunu Néew, Sunu Réew, so our bodies in our country, in order to pressure the state decision. So diverse actors such as doctors, lawyers, finally reached their goal for ensuring to the fallen martyrs, as they were targeted, their rights for repatriation. So what was interesting also is that the participants were sure about their victory since the campaign started, and the state finally reauthorized body repatriation of COVID-19 victims with special rules. So the implication of the firemen for body transport of the coffins from the airport to the cemetery, and then the implication of the local Red Cross for burial, but which has been a dispositive quite hard to set and to maintain. So let's focus now on the administration of corpses arriving in Senegal. So I had the chance to conduct fieldwork at the airport of Dakar and at the cargo zone, so I could assist also to families waiting for the arrival of the body of their loved ones. And Dakar International Airport is therefore the focal point for the arrival of bodies. So the management of coffins is carried by airline companies, and the 2AS Dakar's airport cargo company. So there, the transport of coffins is framed legally as a transport of merchandise. So it tells about a kind of liminal ontology between a person and object, which is thus given to the corpse merchandise. So according to the company officer, it's a special merchandise that it has to be manipulated with caution, and an effort of free service is given from this company for the management of the merchandise once arrived at the cargo zone. And on the other hand, the airlines are, of course, for-profit companies that offer a costly transport of the body, and are therefore not solidary, as an employee remarked. So after being delivered, here's the corpses are taken by hearses drivers or family convoys who receive the coffin and undertake sometimes very long journeys before burial, sometimes carrying the coffin on the roof of the vehicle. So we'll see now how bodies are administrated in urban cemeteries of Dakar and Touba. Okay, so the city and main cemetery of Touba, which is a second Senegalese major city after the capital, and it's located a few hundred kilometers on the east. So Touba attracts believers from all around the world, as it is the only city, the transnational capital of the Murid Brotherhood. So constructing, building a house, but also being buried in Touba is seen as a promise for the access to paradise. So necropolis population is therefore increasing as the city's populations increases also. So, and however, there is all the transnational chain which is deployed by the religious brotherhood to verify the information, as they say in their terms, about the deceased, and control who can be buried and which corpses are refused for burial. So, for example, there was a case of a Senegalese migrant of homosexual orientation who died in Belgium and was refused for burial by religious authorities during the last months. And on the other hand, the main cemetery of Dakar, the capital city, reveals a sort of translocal administration by communal and urban authorities, ensuring a free service of Hirsis transport and going often far beyond their territorial responsibilities towards the airport, which is located at 50 kilometers away from the capital city, but they also go to Touba and even to remote regions of the interior of the country. So at the cemetery, the administration deals sometimes also with difficulty between body repatriation, burial, international requirements, and the traditional practice of burial without the coffin. So we will finally examine what happens after the body repatriation process, such as the implication of survivors' pensions. All right, so last but not least, the way the migrant contributed regularly or not to social security systems in destination countries influenced significantly the economy of its transnational family after the death of the migrants. So this way, families may access to Spanish and Italian survivors' pensions doing act of survival every year in Dakar. So I could conduct field work there in the Spanish embassy and in Italian syndicates. So two institutions that ensure the access to survivors' pensions, but with very contrasted positions. Sorry. So there is the case of the Italian Patronati, which is actually a syndicate financed by the Italian state for granting social protection rights to workers and the family. So this case is quite unique, as it is nevertheless still a non-state actor, but with a clear syndical orientation. So they want also to open an office in Touba. Well, and the other case is the Spanish embassy with a consular authorities management of the issue. So cases of polygamy, the traditional practice of new marriage of widows, but also situation of analphabetism or distance with the administration are some features that challenge also the access to the pension. And on the other hand, when accessing it, the pension enable micro entrepreneurship for families. Sorry. So now let's conclude. I hope I'm good with time. So in conclusions, we can see that there is a very large diversity of expressions of transnational engagement around death that shape also the future of the living. So first, body repatriation as the #1 cause for solidarity implies transnational engagement of a diversity of actors here and there between the planification of the death and political activity, and sometimes between administration of the death also. So the very different patterns of Senegalese migration between Belgium and Spain shaped very contrasted profiles also that deal with different capitals and needs around the issue, but among the same core concerns. So ensuring a good death to the deceased, but also the regeneration of the communities, ties, and life. So while they give birth to new actors such as social movements, violent deaths are very bad deaths that disturb and crystallize engagement. So revealing contested legitimacies to engage, to speak, to pay for, and through the deaths between migrant associations, the families of the victims, and the state. So once I arrived in Senegal, the corpses merchandised are first managed by private sector and then by public or religious local authorities, all engaging in different scales, renting facilities for transport and burial, or controlling the information about the repatriated. After the death of the migrants, transnational families' economy is still affected by post-mortem social protection, as seen. So accessing European survivors' pensions in Dakar gives them an opportunity to micro-entrepreneurship, now with difficulty with the transnational administrations. So this, in a few words, has the potential to be a constructive vehicle. It embraces indeed broader concerns that this itself and shape the future of transnational relationships between all those transnational actors. So in a nutshell, you can see also through the very explicit logos designed by a collective claiming for the free body repatriation of Senegalese migrants. Sorry, body repatriation remains a core concern for migrants, a real brain teaser, un vrai casse-tête. So for further debate, we could still think about the idea of a right for body repatriation beyond a legal understanding of it, as we started working comparatively on this issue with my colleague Carol Wenger, wondering how is this right framed or perceived in other countries such as Tunisia or Pakistan, where body repatriation is a granted public funded right since decades. So thank you very much for your attention, and I would very appreciate your questions and comments to improve my research. Thank you.